What's the creepiest encounter you've ever had with a stranger? When I lived in a rental property on the west side of Albuquerque many moons ago, I had a sudden knock on my front door. I opened it and found a man claiming to be a census taker. I figured, okay, fine. I guess someone actually needs to do that job. He started off with the standard procedure, asking me how many people lived in the home and how long I had been leasing the property. But then, the conversation took a sharp, unsettling turn. He looked down at his form and casually asked for my social security number, as well as my wife's. A massive red flag immediately went up in my head. No. I absolutely do not give my social security number to anyone except the Internal Revenue Service. When I refused, his entire demeanor shifted from professional to aggressively cold. He stared straight at me and said, "It is the law. You have to provide me with it." My blood started to boil at the blatant manipulation. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, I absolutely do not. Now, please leave my property right now." He did not look intimidated at all. He just locked his eyes onto mine and replied, "I will be back tomorrow." Sure enough, the psychopath shows up the very next day. He started banging violently on my front door and yelling at the top of his lungs from the porch, "I know you are home. I know you are in there. I will be back tomorrow." The sheer audacity of this stranger was turning into a living nightmare. He actually came back for a third consecutive day, pounding on the wood. I did not open the door this time. I just stood in the hallway and yelled through the deadbolt, "I am calling the police. You fucking psychopath." Sure enough, the police showed up about 15 minutes later. The creep was still standing right there on my porch, casually holding his clipboard like he belonged there. The officers immediately intercepted him and took his identification card. The deputy got on his car radio to run the credentials and came back about 10 minutes later with a grim look on his face. He turned to the fraud and said, "Sir, there is absolutely no record of you working for the local Census Bureau. You will need to vacate the premises immediately." It was an absolutely bizarre and terrifying experience that still gives me chills. Cultural note. In the United States, official United States Census Bureau workers will never ask for a citizen's social security number, bank account information, or political affiliations. Impersonating a federal worker or using fake credentials to gather sensitive personal data at residential doorsteps is a serious criminal offense, often linked to advanced identity theft rings or home casing operations. I genuinely love to walk and run along the isolated forest trails near my area. One afternoon, I decided to head out completely alone to clear my head. The atmosphere was peaceful, but the very moment I was about to step onto the dirt trail, a bizarre interaction shattered the quiet. A man who was just arriving at the gravel parking lot in his vehicle suddenly honked his horn loudly. He leaned out of his window and started waving at me aggressively. At first, my brain jumped to a rational conclusion. Oh, maybe it is just someone I know. I casually waved back and started taking a few steps toward his car to see his face. As the distance closed, a sudden wave of anxiety hit my stomach. I realized I did not know this individual at all. He was a complete stranger. Feeling an immediate biological alert, I turned around and started walking back toward the safety of the forest trail. The man quickly drove off, and I genuinely thought that was the absolute end of the situation. I told myself he was probably just a friendly, over-enthusiastic local. So I kept walking deeper into the woods, but within about 2 minutes a cold sensation crept up my spine. I heard heavy footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. Before I could even turn around, the same man from the parking lot was suddenly walking right next to me, forcing a conversation. He was remarkably thin, possessed long, unkempt hair, and his overall presence just deeply scared me. He had a massive heavy tote bag hung tightly from one shoulder, and curiously, his opposite arm was completely hidden inside the bag. He looked at me with an unhinged smile and said, "Yeah, I just came to walk with my cat. She is inside my bag. She loves coming here." That statement triggered a massive red flag. At this point, I had completely stopped walking, and we were just standing in the middle of the narrow trail facing each other. The whole time he talked to me, he kept deliberately stepping closer and closer into my personal space. I was so disoriented by the fear that I did not realize just how much ground we had covered until I glanced down at my feet. I was not standing on the hard cement trail anymore. His aggressive positioning had subtly forced my body off the path, and I was now standing on the raw forest grass, really close to the thick, dense trees. He kept persistently asking if he could walk deeper into the woods with me, or if I wanted to go with him to his vehicle. That relentless questioning, coupled with him continuing to close the physical distance and keeping his arm deeply concealed inside that heavy bag, like he was about to pull out a weapon, completely freaked me out. I began to get incredibly anxious and nervous. I know for a fact he could tell my body was trembling, but that did not stop his advance. Any normal, decent person would have immediately sensed the discomfort and left me alone. I looked him in the eyes, firmly told him I had to go, and started taking deliberate steps backward toward the main entrance of the trail. I decided right then that I was not going to continue my run. I was just going to head straight back to the safety of my locked car. He refused to let me disengage. He kept walking aggressively toward me as I was backing away, shouting questions like, "Oh, why? Do you have a husband?" Or, "What else do you have to do today?" I am still not entirely sure what his ultimate intentions were that afternoon, but I am absolutely convinced that if it were not for the fact that there were so many local bicyclists passing by that specific trail, he would have violently done something to me in those woods. I was pregnant with my first child back in the year 2001. Right before my official due date, I went out to do some casual shopping at a local Walmart. After a few minutes, a strange sensation crept up my spine. I started to notice this specific woman appearing on every single aisle I went down. I would guess she was somewhere in her mid-30s. The repetition of her face on the grocery side, then the pharmacy side, started to trip my internal alarms. When I finally went over to the baby section to look at some clothes, she closed the distance and initiated a conversation. At first, her questions were completely common, just asking about the gender of the baby. But then, the script flipped. Her questions started getting incredibly strange and invasive. She wanted to know if I was married, and whether we lived in a house or a small apartment. She then commented on my accent and was intensely curious if we had any family visiting the area for the upcoming birth. It was just a deeply odd vibe. I was young, only 20 years old at the time, but I was already married. Both my husband and I were active duty military, living completely off base in a standard rental house. I tried to keep my composure, still sifting through the baby clothes. I just told her that, yes, we were very excited, and wished her a good rest of her day. I thought that would end it, but she then started physically following me through the store. She kept talking, telling me that her husband was waiting right outside the facility and that they could easily help me transport my heavy groceries directly to my house. That is when a wave of pure nervousness hit my stomach. I firmly told her I was completely fine, thanking her, and stated that my husband was currently at home waiting to help me unburden the car. She did not back off. She then claimed they had a massive truck and that she would gladly buy me a large, expensive baby item right now. I politely declined again, but she became intensely insistent, her tone borderline aggressive. She then offered to buy my husband a brand new grill, since I claimed we did not need any more baby things. I was reaching a state of total panic because I knew this lady was not right in the head. I quickly navigated to the checkout lanes, and she mirrored my exact moves. She managed to get out of the store just before me. As I walked through the exit glass, I watched her walk across the asphalt. Sure enough, she and her husband were pulled up right along the curb at the front entrance, idling near the soda vending machines. They were sitting inside a beat-up old yellow box truck. The husband rolled down the window, locked his eyes onto me, and said, "We would be happy to help you with that." I declined one final time, my voice trembling, and hurried to my vehicle. I loaded the bags into the trunk while watching them for a tense minute. They did not move an inch. They just sat in that yellow cab, watching my every movement. As soon as I pulled out of the parking space, their brake lights tapped, and they pulled out too. I hauled ass out of that parking lot, driving erratically. They were only behind me for a minute or two before losing me in traffic. Even so, I drove around the city crying for about 30 minutes, panicking and making absolutely sure they were gone before I finally went home. I am 44 years old now, and that remains one of the few times I have ever felt that sickening level of pure fear in my life. I am pretty sure my dog saved me from a highly dangerous encounter. At the time, I was very pregnant and was just leaving the local grocery store with my shopping cart. My dog, Lexi, was waiting patiently for me inside the vehicle. She always loved car rides when the weather was good. So, I was casually loading up the groceries into the trunk when a cold realization hit me. I noticed that a strange man I had seen sitting alone in a vehicle before I even went into the store was still there, and he was actively watching me. He slowly got out of his car and asked if I needed any assistance. Now, I get it. I was heavily pregnant, so asking to help could just be the polite thing to do, but something about his body language immediately put me on absolute alert. I was completely unnerved by his presence, and to this day, I still cannot state exactly what it was that triggered my internal alarms. I firmly said, "No thanks, I have got it." But instead of backing off, he continued to step out of his vehicle and walk directly towards my car. Lexi had been snuggled up asleep on the front seat, but she must have heard the sudden spike of concern in my voice. The stranger continued to walk in my direction, smiling, and claiming he just wanted to help me out. I continued to back away, saying, "No, I do not need help. No worries." As the man aggressively approached the open hatch of my vehicle where I was loading the items, Lexi sprang up from the front seat. She leapt straight over the back row, jumped into the cargo area, and started growling furiously, baring her sharp teeth. It was pitch black outside, and since she was an all-black dog, she seemingly appeared out of thin air like a shadow. That sudden, aggressive display was the only thing that made the dude freeze, back up, and finally leave. He started cursing loudly at me as he retreated, calling me horrible names just because I refused to accept his help, and because I let my dog threaten him. I will say, thank goodness it was dark. Lexi was actually a cardigan Welsh corgi that was completely black, and she looked far less intimidating in the daylight. In the sun, she basically looked like a black lab puppy, but possessed super short, stumpy little legs. But that night, she was a fierce protector. She stayed right by my ankles for the rest of the evening once we got back home, refusing to let me out of her sight for a single second. Cultural note. Security experts in the United States emphasize that perpetrators often use the offer of assistance, known as the help trap, to lower a victim's defenses and close the physical distance in isolated areas like parking lots. Additionally, canine behaviorists note that dogs are highly sensitive to human micro-expressions and chemical changes caused by adrenaline, allowing them to detect predatory intent in strangers before a human consciously recognizes the danger. This happened out in San Jose, California. At the time, I was working as a sales representative at a local car dealership. One quiet afternoon, a lady walked into our showroom, expressing intense interest in purchasing a high-end pickup truck. Right from the start, she made it clear that she was planning to pay for the entire vehicle using cold, hard cash. She was heavily adorned in beautiful, incredibly expensive jewelry, but her overall demeanor was deeply unsettling. She was pacing erratically, her gaze shifting constantly around the room. The entire time I was interacting with her, my brain was desperately trying to analyze her behavior, attempting to figure out if she was currently under the influence of narcotics or dealing with an extreme manic episode. Ultimately, a heavy feeling of absolute dread settled into my stomach. I realized I was not comfortable stepping into a vehicle to go on an isolated test drive with her. We were getting close to our official closing time anyway, so I used that as a tactical excuse. There was just something completely off about her presence. I politely wrapped up the conversation, closed up the main shop for the evening, and walked to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I watched her through my mirrors. She was just wandering completely alone through the dark lot, staring blankly at the parked inventory. The very next morning, I was sitting at home having breakfast when I looked up at the television screen. My blood completely froze. There was her face. Her mugshot was being broadcasted on the local news. It turned out that she had brutally attacked an elderly lady inside her own residence, striking her repeatedly with a heavy hammer until she passed away, before robbing the entire home. She had committed this horrific crime the exact night before visiting our dealership. The expensive jewelry she was casually wearing in front of me belonged to the victim. She was actively trying to buy a clean getaway vehicle with the stolen money. I cannot help but feel that I barely escaped that situation with my life. I am so incredibly glad I trusted my gut on that one. Cultural note. In the United States, law enforcement agencies routinely distribute high-resolution mugshots to local news networks immediately following an arrest for violent crimes to gather public leads. Furthermore, corporate security protocols in modern automotive dealerships heavily restrict cash transactions exceeding $10,000, requiring businesses to file a Form 8300 with the IRS to prevent illicit money laundering or asset liquidation by active fugitives. I commented on this before on another thread, but the memory is still completely valid. I think about this specific night an awful lot, considering it happened over 20 years ago. Back when I was in high school, I was waiting outside for my dad to pick me up after classes ended. He unfortunately got stuck at work, so he was running quite late, leaving me waiting alone out front of the main entrance. There were a couple of other kids hanging around at first, but they were being systematically picked up by their parents. After a bit, the area grew quiet, and an older gentleman walked straight across the street toward me. He stopped a few feet away and asked if my name was Ashley. I looked at him and simply said, "No, sorry." This should have been the exact point where our interaction ended. Instead, he proceeded to chat, explaining in detail that he was there to meet this Ashley girl. Then he looked at me with a bizarre, penetrating stare and asked, "Am I sure I am not Ashley? We met on the internet. You seem just like her." Like many young ladies growing up in that era, I was heavily raised to always be polite to adults. Thankfully, my parents also taught me to be extremely cautious. So, while I did not feel comfortable calling out the sheer creepiness of his statements to his face, I did try to physically get away from him. I turned around and tried to go back inside the school building, but the heavy glass doors were already locked for the evening. I pulled out my phone and called my dad to see where he was. I mentioned that there were only a few kids left outside, and within clear range of the guy hearing my voice, I explicitly mentioned that some random guy was waiting out here for a girl. My dad immediately said, "That is weird. Stay completely away from him." And we hung up. But the stranger did not take the hint. He kept trying to force a conversation, asking me intrusive questions about my life. I walked down to the completely opposite side of the school grounds to create distance, but he soon followed my footsteps. I quickly ambled back toward the last random kids waiting near the curb. Eventually, the entire crowd was down to just one young man, me, and a creep. When that young man's ride finally arrived, I followed him straight to his mom's car. The mother looked at me, noticing my rigid posture, and asked if I was okay, and if I knew that man. I lied, and told her I was okay, but admitted that no, I did not know him. She had to leave immediately, though, because she was running late for her shift at work. The moment her taillights disappeared, the man continued to try to talk to me. He asked more personal questions, aggressively trying to get me to walk down the road with him into the dark. Thank goodness I finally saw my dad's truck in the distance and started walking fast toward the headlights. I hopped into the passenger seat, locking the door behind me. My dad spotted the man standing under the streetlight. "Is that the guy you mentioned? Was he bothering you? You can tell me right now," my dad said, his grip tightening on the wheel. I froze, and out of that conditioned politeness I replied, "No. He was just chatting while he waited for Ashley." I died a little inside that day because I had more than a few perfect opportunities to make myself safer. I could have explained the full gravity of the situation to my dad on the phone or in the truck. I could have called the police. I could have insisted that the schoolmate's mother take me down the road to the local library. From that night, over 20 years ago to this very day, I have replayed that exact scenario over and over thousands of times in my head. But I use that dark information now to make my nieces more comfortable with advocating for themselves. You cannot change your past, but you can definitely change someone's future. I worked as a registered massage therapist for 7 long years and had just finally opened up my own independent practice. I was leasing a small office space at a multidisciplinary clinic. There were several other medical practitioners in the building who would routinely cross-refer clients to me for therapeutic services. One afternoon, one of the naturopathic doctors informed me that a male client of hers had explicitly asked for my personal work schedule. He claimed he was wanting to book a deep tissue massage session. A cold feeling immediately hit my stomach when she described him. This happened to be the exact same man who had been staring at me with an intense, predatory gaze from the communal waiting area for weeks. His look was so deeply unsettling that I routinely had to close my heavy office door just to escape his eyes. After somehow obtaining my direct contact details, he bypassed the clinic and called me directly on my personal phone while I was relaxing at home with my partner. He began aggressively interrogating me, asking questions like whether I was single or if I had a husband. Then he asked exactly when I worked entirely alone in the building, claiming that was the specific time he would prefer to come in for his appointment. This automatically triggered a massive wave of bad vibes. I lied and firmly told him that I am never alone in the office. I added that my calendar was completely booked out for months, suggesting he would be much better off seeking treatment elsewhere. I genuinely thought this defensive wall had deterred him. However, the very next time he visited the clinic, He Sills managed to book a session with me by manipulating the receptionist. On the day of the appointment, I was sitting alone in my treatment room finishing up some patient charts. The door suddenly swung open, and he stepped inside, shutting the wood tightly behind him. He aggressively demanded that I write my exact hours down on a business card so he could cross-examine them in person against the clinic hours. I kept my voice calm and told him I was in the middle of urgent notes, and that if he was really that interested in my availability, he could easily check my public website. He stepped closer, looked at me with an unhinged expression, and told me he had scheduled a session for the following week and was so excited. He was visibly giddy while saying this, his breath heavy, and my body started to completely freeze. I got up from my desk to tactically guide him toward the exit. Instead of backing away, he took a sudden step forward and violently tried to assault me, trying to force his lips onto mine. He told me I was just so beautiful, that he could not believe he had successfully secured an appointment with me. That is the exact millisecond I realized this individual truly believed I was an illicit worker, and that our medical clinic was some sort of undercover parlor. I completely panicked. Before I could even process the shock, he began running his hands all over my body, utilizing his weight to try and pin my torso down onto my own massage table. Pure survival adrenaline kicked in. I managed to physically fight him off, shoving him away with all my strength. He exited the room so nonchalantly, turning around to tell me to have a good day, and repeating how excited he was for our next encounter. The moment the front door closed, I called the police. I explained the entire physical violation to the dispatcher. The detectives instructed me to keep his upcoming scheduled appointment on the books. When the day arrived, undercover officers showed up at the clinic and arrested him right outside my office door. He was formally charged and found guilty of criminal assault. Before his official arrest, he had been calling my phone multiple times every single night, just breathing heavily into the receiver for minutes. I was able to secure a permanent restraining order against him, and just as quickly as he had invaded my life, he was gone. During the aftermath, the lead police officer working my case revealed a horrifying detail. This man actually owned a local nail salon. The authorities heavily suspected that forced labor and human trafficking were occurring inside that business, targeting vulnerable immigrant technicians who relied entirely on this man for their legal work permits. I am not entirely sure what ultimately came of that federal investigation, but he and his wife still openly operate that exact same nail salon inside a local shopping mall to this very day. Cultural note. In the United States, professional medical massage therapists are strictly regulated by state boards and require official licensing, separating them entirely from illicit establishments. Undercover law enforcement operations, often coordinating with specialized human trafficking units, frequently utilize scheduled appointments at businesses to apprehend suspects flagged for predatory behavior or visa fraud exploitation without disrupting public safety. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. In July of the year 2006, I was brutally attacked while jogging on a secluded bike path. The asphalt trail butted right up against a large university campus located in the Midwest. I was just nearing the absolute end of a grueling 5-mile run when the incident happened. My body was exhausted, and my focus was entirely on getting back to my vehicle. The path itself looped around a heavily wooded, unlit area and a stagnant lake, forming a massive oval shape. I had actually seen this particular guy standing near the entrance at the very beginning of my jog, but I thought completely nothing of it at the time. Looking back, that was a massive red flag. I can only conclude that the predator had calculated my route, stepped into the shadows, and waited patiently in the adjacent woods for me to loop all the way back around to that isolated sector. Suddenly, he lunged out of the brush. He violently attacked me and threw my body hard onto the ground, knocking the wind completely out of my lungs. As I struggled to breathe, he immediately attempted to suffocate me with his hands, trying to suppress my screams while violently forcing my weight up into the dense, dark wooded area. I was completely trapped, fighting for my life against his strength. After a very short, agonizing period of time, by sheer good fortune, another man came jogging along the exact same path. He did not hesitate. He rushed over, engaged the struggle, and physically pulled the guy off me. Realizing he had lost the element of surprise, my attacker turned and fled deeper into the thick timber. The emergency services were immediately called to the scene, and thanks to the quick response, my attacker was later apprehended by the local police. The guy ended up being formally convicted of kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. However, the justice system failed us. He only served 3.5 years in prison out of a total 8-year sentence. The most terrifying part is that he was not a first-time offender. He already possessed previous convictions for armed robbery and violent assault. That dark path changed the way I look at strangers forever. When I was in the 3rd grade, I played on a local community service soccer team. Normally, our parents would step up to act as the head coach and assistant coach for the season. But during one specific weekend game, the parent who usually filled the assistant coach position called in sick. Because of the sudden vacancy, the community service center sent a random middle-aged woman to act as our substitute assistant coach for that afternoon. Well, it also happened to be my absolute best friend's birthday that exact same day. She was throwing a massive sleepover party right after the match concluded, and basically the whole team was invited. We were all acting like normal little girls, being super excited, cheering, and talking non-stop on the sidelines about the upcoming sleepover at Millie's house. It was about halfway through the game when the substitute lady suddenly called me over by my name. The moment she spoke, my biological instincts instantly knew something was completely off. A cold wave hit my chest and my stomach dropped. I walked over to her reluctantly, keeping my distance, and stood a couple of feet away from her bench. She immediately wiggled her index finger, motioning for me to close the gap. She whispered, "Closer," forcing me to lean in until I was right next to her face. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Hey, I just wanted you to know that I am Millie's mom, so you will be coming home with me today after the game. As soon as the match is over, come right with me to my car. Do not stop to talk to anyone." I got such incredibly bad vibes from her words. My mind short-circuited because I knew what Millie's actual mother looked like, and this stranger was definitely not her. I ran back to the field and clung close to Millie for the rest of the game, my chest tightening with fear. The moment the match ended, I turned to her and whispered, "Millie, I will explain everything later, but after the game, let us run as fast as we can to your mom's car, okay?" Thankfully, she did not question my panic. The very second the final whistle rang out across the field, we rocketed toward the parking lot together. I think up until that exact point, I had still retained some childlike hope, because I did not think adults would just blatantly lie to a kid like that. But when we pulled open the door and scrambled into the back seat, a totally different woman turned around from the steering wheel. I was breathless and asked, "Wait, are you Millie's mom?" She looked super confused and replied, "Yes I am. Why?" I frantically explained the entire interaction while we were on the drive home. Millie's mother became super concerned, her face going completely pale, and she strictly instructed me to tell my parents the very next day. But when I finally told my parents, they completely brushed it off, thinking I was just making up stories, and they did not believe me at all. My grandmother believed my every word, though, and for that, I am eternally thankful. I felt incredibly scared, alone, and confused for a long time, because my young mind simply could not understand why that strange lady would have tried to take me away like that. I was traveling north for the very first time via a Greyhound bus. I was only 23 years old back then, completely inexperienced, and nervous as hell about the whole trip. As I was walking toward my designated outdoor platform with my massive backpacking pack strapped to my shoulders, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was a sketchy group of people just leaning casually against the bus station's gritty exterior brick walls. Suddenly, one woman from the group detached herself from the wall and started walking directly toward my path. I chose to completely ignore her. The terminal area was crowded, and I was entirely tunnel visioning my way to my bus stop, trying to figure out where to go since I had never traveled this way before. I was almost to my platform when, out of absolute nowhere, I felt the sharpest, most mind-numbing pain rip through my left arm. It turns out this random woman had closed the distance and with all her physical might, elbowed me directly in the center of my upper bicep as I walked past her. The sheer force of the impact literally knocked my body 3 feet to the right, throwing me completely off balance under the weight of my heavy pack. Out of pure survival reflex, I yelped loudly in pain and whipped my head around to face her. She was standing dead still, frozen exactly on the spot where she had assaulted me. She was looking directly at me. Holy fuck, the gaze this absolute stranger had locked onto me was as if I had personally murdered her entire family and spit on their graves. She looked ready to fucking kill me right there on the pavement. I have never in my life seen someone look at me with that level of raw, unhinged malice. It made my stomach drop instantly, and a cold sweat broke out across my neck. Somehow, her eyes looked completely lifeless, yet they were overflowing with utter burning hate for me at the exact same time. I knew better than to escalate the situation. I just turned back around, squeezed my pack straps, and walked even faster toward the safety of the crowded stop. I ended up with a massive dark purple bruise that spanned the entire length of my upper arm, and I could not use that limb for basically the entire duration of my trip. I never want to be looked at like that ever again. My instincts told me that if I had said a single word, or if I had done anything to defend myself, this woman would have done something absolutely insane. Well, more insane than violently slamming into a lost-looking 23-year-old girl for no legal reason. When I was about 14 years old, my longtime childhood friend and I were dealing with incredibly strict parents. During our summer break, the only way to experience any real freedom was to sneak out of our bedroom windows in the middle of the night. We would meet up just to hang out, walk around our sleepy town, and generally sneak around the empty streets feeling daring. One warm night, I walked over and stood outside her house at the usual designated time, but she never showed up. I waited in the shadows for a while, but eventually gave up and decided to walk back home alone. The silence of the neighborhood felt much heavier than usual. About halfway back, the headlights of a car cut through the darkness, coming down the street directly towards me. I was walking on the same side of the road as the approaching vehicle, and a sudden, sharp biological instinct told me to cross over to the other side immediately. Just as I decided to step onto the asphalt, the car started slowing down to a crawl. I quickly crossed the street, and the moment my boots hit the opposite sidewalk, the car sped up again. As the chassis passed right next to me, the driver slowly turned his face towards my direction. He gave me a deep, penetrating stare that completely chilled the blood in my veins. Because the entire street was otherwise completely silent and deserted, The acoustic signature of the engine was incredibly clear. I could easily hear this car reach the very end of the road, brake hard, and then turn right back around to head my way again. Thinking fast, I controlled my breathing and waited until the vehicle had almost reached my position before suddenly sprinting back across to the other side of the road. I caught another glimpse of the driver, and this time, the look he gave me through the glass was unmistakably angry. He accelerated hard once more. As I was just passing a smaller, poorly lit side road, I turned the corner and ran down there as fast as my legs could carry me. I knew there was a tight pedestrian alleyway at the far end that I could use to get home, a path where he could not physically drive his car. Again, I heard the vehicle reach the intersection behind me and violently turn around. As the low rumble of the engine approached the side street, panic took over, and I dived flat behind a parked sedan. He turned down my side road, driving very, very slowly. Peeking out from behind the rear tire, I caught a clear glimpse of the driver looking frantically left and right as his vehicle crept along the curb. He was actively hunting for me in the dark. As soon as the car turned the next corner out of sight, I scrambled up and ran up a nearby gravel driveway. At the very end of the path sat a couple of old lock-up garages. By some amazing stroke of pure luck, I grabbed a handle and found that one of the structures was completely unlocked. I slipped inside the dark space, pulled the heavy door to a near close, crawled under a dusty tarpaulin in a pitch-black corner, and just froze. A few minutes later, the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed through the garage walls. Then, I heard one of the most terrifying sounds I have ever encountered in my life, slow, heavy footsteps crunching on the loose gravel outside. They walked straight to my end of the driveway and just stood there in absolute silence for what felt like eternity. I have no clue how he even tracked me up that specific path, as he should not have been able to see me bolt up the driveway through his rearview mirror. But apparently, his predatory instinct was sharp. Eventually, he seemed to give up, and I heard the heavy footsteps receding back down the gravel, followed by another door slam and the engine revving away into the night. I have no idea how many hours I stayed paralyzed under that plastic tarp in the pitch dark, with my leg muscles cramping up, but it felt like forever. The sun was already coming up by the time I finally sneaked back into my house. This encounter took place almost 30 years ago, but I can still feel that exact physical chill on my neck. Cultural note: in suburban sectors of the United States during the decades of the 80s and 90s, nighttime security infrastructure relied heavily on localized neighborhood watch programs rather than automated surveillance. Safety data from urban institutes indicates that perpetrators targeting minors on foot at night frequently utilize low-speed vehicular tracking, exploiting the lack of physical barriers or immediate public sanctuaries in residential grid systems to corner their targets. A lifetime ago, when my girlfriend and I were young and reckless, we used to regularly hitchhike all the way to the beach. One warm afternoon, we were standing right on the edge of Queens Boulevard when a massive limousine suddenly pulled up and stopped to pick us up. The chassis was an older model, and the vehicle honestly did not look great upon closer inspection, but we did not think anything of it at the time. We were just incredibly excited to get a free ride in a big, comfortable luxury car. We quickly piled into the spacious back seat, throwing our gear down. The driver turned around, muttered a quick hello, and asked us exactly where we were heading. The moment we told him we were going to Rockaway, his eyes widened. He smiled and said, "Holy shit, I am actually headed right there now." To our credit, Mary and I both immediately locked eyes. That statement sounded completely off. Usually, when you hitchhike along that specific route, drivers will only offer you a ride halfway because getting to Rockaway requires a massive, inconvenient right turn off the main highway. As the car accelerated into traffic, a heavy feeling of absolute dread settled into my stomach. I started noticing that the driver was really dirty. His clothes were stained, his hair was matted, and his hygiene did not match the vehicle at all. Then my eyes scanned the paneling, and my blood completely froze. Both of the interior rear door handles were completely missing. We were trapped inside a rolling cage. I was exceptionally big for my age back then, sporting super long hair, and I looked a lot older and more dangerous than I actually was. I immediately tapped into that physical presence, leaning forward aggressively. I looked the driver dead in the eyes through the rear-view mirror and told him if he did not let us out at the very next traffic light, I would come straight through the central partition and beat his ass to a pulp. The man instantly panicked, trying a whole lot of defensive manipulation. He raised his hands and said, "Hey man, just be cool. Let us just smoke this joint together." I did not back down for a single millisecond. I barked back at him, telling him he had until the next light or I would start physically tearing his car apart from the inside. Faced with pure violent retaliation, he finally hit a master button on his dashboard. The heavy door locks popped up with a loud click. I immediately shoved Mary out onto the pavement and followed right behind her, slamming the door. The dude absolutely had something horrific planned for us that afternoon, and it was not good. Cultural note: Queens Boulevard is one of the longest and busiest thoroughfares in New York City, historically leading toward major highway connections to Long Island and the Rockaway Peninsula. In the late 20th century, the removal of interior door handles or locking mechanisms in older private livery vehicles was a notorious tactic utilized by unauthorized gypsy cab drivers and predators to prevent passengers from escaping during transit. My personal experience is pretty tame compared to other stories, to be completely honest, but I still think about it occasionally when the weather gets cold. I was either late 12 or had just turned 13 years old, and I was casually walking to my local school. The building was about a mile away from my house, so it was a decent long walk for a kid my age. It was snowy as frost outside, a complete blizzard, and the sidewalk was practically buried. Suddenly, a large van pulled up directly in front of my path and parked off to the side of the road. I immediately stopped walking right there in the snow. I have always been very suspicious of strangers, a natural trait that kept my guard up. A woman opened the door, got out of the van, and asked me if I wanted a quick ride because it was so freezing out. That exact action triggered a massive alarm in my head. I got incredibly suspicious because most normal people who offer a kid a ride just roll down their window while driving by slowly. But this woman actually parked the vehicle and physically stepped out of her van just to ask me this face to face. It instantly made me feel like she wanted to physically snatch my body and drag me straight into the vehicle. Like I said, I had stopped walking entirely, and I refused to take a single step closer to her or the van. I then noticed the van had heavily tinted windows. That was another huge red flag for me, blocking any view of who else was sitting inside that cab. I looked at her and said, "No, I am fine. Thanks for asking, though." This polite refusal was not enough for her, though. The woman asked me again, repeating the offer about 2 or 3 times. Her intense persistence was super sus, and the tension in the air was thickening. Eventually, I realized I needed to shut this down completely. I looked at her and said, "Look, this walking is really important to me. I get bullied at school for being fat, and I am trying to lose weight. That is why I do not take the bus anymore, so I walk to school. I really do not want a ride, okay?" I said it with a really forceful, aggressive tone, The truth is, I did not give a single shit about losing weight back then, but I was a chubby kid, and that quick lie was literally all I could think of to say to make her back off. My strategy finally worked. She stopped talking, gave up, and drove away into the snow. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened to me if I had been a dumb, trusting kid and accepted that ride. Cultural note. Child safety advocates in the United States frequently train school-aged children in what is known as stranger danger protocols, specifically highlighting that over-persistence or a stranger exiting a vehicle to initiate contact are high-risk behavioral red flags. Additionally, during severe winter weather in suburban sectors, predators often exploit hazardous conditions under the guise of predatory chivalry or offering assistance to isolate vulnerable targets. I do not know his real name, but he firmly told me to call him Mr. Tom. I only spoke with him for about half an hour in total, but I have never forgotten the raw horror of that conversation. When I was 21 years old, I worked in an adult entertainment facility for 6 months. I was not working at the sharp, dangerous end of the business, though. I had successfully talked the boss into letting me edit a promotional lifestyle magazine for his connected hotel and casino. Initially, I did not have a private office, so I routinely used the shared computers in the adjacent internet cafe to do my work. One quiet afternoon, this older gentleman came over to my desk. He asked if I could help him print some digital files out in exchange for a good amount of money, but he explicitly insisted that I could not look at what I was printing. I told him that was technically impossible, as I needed to physically open the files on screen to format the printer layout. He thought about it for a bit, staring blankly at the glass, and then finally acquiesced. The moment I got those files up on screen, my stomach completely turned. It was really, really vile. It consisted of graphic, twisted short stories about women being severely abused, mutilated, and subjected to horrific, degrading acts with animals. There were also some crude, dark pencil sketches accompanying the text to illustrate the violence. It was incredibly sick stuff, but it was fiction, if there is any kind of silver lining to be found in that darkness. Because I was in absolute shock, and did not immediately jump up in horror and flee the room, he presumably concluded that I was some kind of kindred spirit. He sat down next to me and calmly began telling me his actual life story. I have never hated a human being so profoundly and so quickly. He told me he had spent his entire 20s traveling the world, actively tracking down, abusing, and torturing vulnerable women in the underground trade. He stayed in that dark world until his 30s, when he claimed he underwent a psychological shift and discovered that he preferred it when they turned the violence around and inflicted the pain back onto him instead. Back then, in the year 2001, he was maybe in his mid-50s. The dark timeline perfectly fits for him to have been deployed in the Vietnam War during the start of his sadistic endeavors, though he never made that connection explicit to me. As he stood up to leave, his parting phrase stuck in my mind like a malignant tumor. "Son, I have got all the pain money can buy." Cultural note. Psychological profiles of violent offenders often highlight a progression from consuming or creating highly sadistic fantasy material to enacting real-world violence. Additionally, criminologists note that a significant number of individuals who exhibited severe antisocial behaviors during the late 20th century had underlying untreated trauma connected to military combat zones, which often manifested as extreme interpersonal malice or severe psychological deviations. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.